This morning we're going to talk a little bit. Again, we go back to theory and practice, theory and practice. We're going to talk a little bit about the calm at the eye of the storm, the center. And you know, I know if you've been watching TV, you've seen the pictures from space of the hurricane as it approaches the shore. And from space, it's amazing. You know, it's magnificent. It's beautiful. It has a symmetry to it. And right at the very center, right at the very eye, it has this clear spot. You know, from the space station when they look down on the satellites, you can see all the way down to the ocean, straight through the clouds and rain and storms and waves and wind, all about. But right at the very center, it's calm. It's calm. And Lori and I have lived on the East Coast most of our lives. Lived a few years inland in Denver. Lived in California for a while. But most of the time we spent on the East Coast, and we've lived through quite a few hurricanes. And occasionally where we were in a position where the eye of the storm passed directly overhead, right over where we were. And the last time that happened, we were living down in Carolina Beach. Maybe it was 10 years ago, I don't know. But it was most interesting because, you know, you watch the weather forecast and they tell you it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And I laugh because they always say, well, it's not gonna be here for another couple of hours. But that's nonsense, because you're already in the storm for a couple of hours before the eye hits the coast. So you're getting blown about. The wind is coming in, the waves are coming in, the rain is going sideways, and all of this stuff is going on for hours, just hours. You're just watching the storm. And then all of a sudden it stops. It's just like in the movie Forrest Gump when it stopped raining. You know, it's like somebody turned the switch off and it stopped raining. All of a sudden it just stops. The wind stops, the rain stops, the sun comes out, the sky is absolutely gorgeous. And people came out of their houses. So, you know, we lived on a canal, and people came out of their houses and they walked down to the docks and they checked their dock lines on their boats. And in a parking lot right across the canal, people gathered. You know, it was kind of like our little community marina there. And people gathered, and they were standing there and they were talking, and I guess they were telling their hurricane stories. And then all of a sudden the weather started to deteriorate again, and everybody went back into their house. And the wind started blowing from the other direction. And it blew for hours, and the rain blew sideways for hours, and the waves slapped against the bulkheads. And then it was over. And then it was over. It's just kind of amazing that right there, in the center of that storm, it was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was calm. And of course, the metaphor for us, what we want to keep in mind is that as we go through life, we sometimes forget the peace and the calm that is at our center, the very center of our being, the very center of our life, which is peace, which is poise. Right? All-knowing plus all power equals poise. What is there for God to be upset about? What is there for God to be worried about? What is there for God to be stressed about? You know, we can imagine, because as human beings, we tend to create our concept of God and just make God kind of like a big human person in the sky, sitting on a throne. And of course, that's a concept. That's nowhere close to reality. But can we imagine God one day getting up and saying, "Oh my goodness, oh, do you know how difficult it is to run this universe? I've got all of these stars, I've got all of these planets, I've got all of these comets that I've got to take care of. You know, I've got the birds and the fishes and the plants down on Earth, and then I got all these people, and they keep." And they're asking constantly, you know, they want this, they want that, they want the other thing. I've got to answer all these prayers, you know. And you kind of get a comedic view of what that would be like, you know. Divine love doesn't worry. Perfect power is never afraid. All wisdom is never afraid. Excuse me. There's nothing for God to stress about. There is no problem so big that the inevitableness of God cannot deal with it. In fact, the divine would not know it as a problem. It cannot know a problem. It just knows activity. It just is, and it knows that it is. That's a very important point to keep in mind when you go into your prayer life, into your treatment. You know, we as human beings, we tend to think that one thing is going to be more difficult than another. You know, well, we want to do our treatment because, well, we want a wart to be removed from our hands, for example. That's not so difficult. But if that was a tumor, you know, oh my goodness, suddenly people would be thinking, well, I need to pray much harder. I need to pray more often. I need to scrunch up my eyes. And none of that's necessary, you see, because one is not more difficult than the other to the divine. And what we want to keep in mind is that what is going on when there is a healing, whether it be in our bodies or in our finances, in our relationships, wherever, what is happening is the perfection that was already there is revealing itself. It is revealing itself. So there's no struggle. There's no struggle to go in there and try to fight and dig out and remove whatever the circumstances might be. It is a letting go of the struggle, so the perfection that is already there can come through. A couple of days ago, they were you know, the weather people were just having a field day. They're following this storm around, and to a large degree, they're kind of trying to make it more than it is. I had a laugh because we went tubing on the river a couple of weeks ago, and we pulled out. There's a very nice kayak ramp over in a park here in Rock Hill. It's a paved ramp, you know, and it's boat ramp, so it goes down at a slant into the water. And it's got little walls on each side about 3 feet high that you know, keep everything contained. And the weather people switched to a live shot of this news anchor. And she's standing on this kayak ramp, and she's got Wellington boots on, you know, the boots, the little barn boots, you might call them, little rubber boots that come up, you know, just not halfway to your calf, but maybe halfway to your calf and your ankle, you know, just kind of maybe 4 inches above your ankle. And she's standing in the water, and she says, the city has closed down the kayak ramp because the river is rising rapidly and dangerously, and look, it's already to the top of my boots. And she was standing, she had backed up just enough that she had about an inch of her boots left. And I laughed, you know, oh my goodness, if she would have stepped back another couple of feet, the river would rise even more, you know. And while she's doing this live shot, and she's talking about how dangerous the river is and why they had to close everything down, this little boy about 8 years old with a fishing pole walks into the frame behind her, and he casts his line out into the river, and his dad comes over and puts his arm around him, and they're just having this, you know, a great father-son moment, fishing in the river, while the person on the TV was trying to hype it up. So we can get caught up in that. You see, we can get caught up in that periphery. We can get caught up in that struggle. We can get caught up in the circumstances and the hype and all of these things that are going on. And what we want to do is we want to find that center. We want to find that part that has never been disturbed and allow it to reveal itself in us, as us, and through us. It was the same river. It was the same river that the little boy was fishing in, and the lady was touting as dangerous and rising and all these things. was the same river. So what we want to consider in our lives is, yes, things happen. Things go on around us. Storms may take place around us. We may have circumstances arise in our finances. May have circumstances arise with our health, or in our love life, our relationships, or in our work environment, all these things. And what we want to stop and ask ourselves is, what are you identifying with? Where is your focus? Where is your attention? Is it on the lady standing in the water, or is it on the little boy with the fishing pole? What are you focusing on? What are you caught up in? See, where's your attention? What is it that you are accepting and expecting as normal? So while they're hyping up all of this weather, they break in and they say there was an 83-foot wave out off the coast of North Carolina. And everybody's going, wow, an 83-foot wave, Like, that's really, really important. And all the rest of the year, nobody talks about how big the waves are offshore. Nobody goes and looks at the buoys offshore that report the heights of the waves. But somebody just got a hold of the fact that there was an 83-foot wave, and they talked about it for a few minutes. And a couple things about that. I took they call it a bareboat captain course years ago. Pretty much you pay a bunch of money and you go on a sailboat for a week, and they give you a piece of paper that says they'll rent you a sailboat. And the gentleman who instructed, the instructor on the boat, had been an instructor at the Polish Naval Academy. And he was on the tall ship, the Coast Guard Academy and the Navy. They have these old square rigger ships, the tall ships, and most countries have them. And he was on that ship, and he was an instructor on that ship. And every summer they would switch half their crew with England. So every summer when they would go on a cruise, half the midshipmen were from Poland, half were from England, and on the English ship the same. And they would go out and they would sail. And he was telling us, all these tales of his great adventures at sea. And in 1976, when we had the race to the tall ships across the Atlantic to come into New York Harbor and pass the Statue of Liberty for the bicentennial, he was the captain of a 50-foot sailboat that Poland had put into this flotilla. And they crossed the Atlantic, and he actually went up the Hudson River, crossed the Great Lakes down to Mississippi to New Orleans, and a film crew was with him and took all these, made a documentary of it. And we asked him, well, what's it like to be, out in the middle of the ocean when a big storm comes up? What's it like to be out there and the waves are getting up, 100 feet high or more? And he says, 1 minute you're down in this swale or this little valley in between two hills on, some distance from you on either side, and they're about 100 feet high, and so you're kind of looking up at the hills. He says, in a little while later, you're up on top of the hill. He says, and then you go down, and you're down in another swale. He says, the boat is riding on the surface. See? If you don't get caught up in the fact that the wave is so much bigger than the boat, it doesn't matter, because the boat is going to float on the surface. And I thought, wow, don't get caught up in the appearances. Don't get caught up in the size of the waves. Don't get caught up in all those things. The boat is floating on the surface. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to trust in. So we get caught up in things that really don't matter a lot. We get caught up in things that just, all they do is they add to our stress level. And what we say we want is peace. We want to find that peace. And Pema Chodron, the Buddhist monk, in one of her books, she said something very interesting. She said, to me, very interesting. She said, we as human beings are unique. We say we want to do one thing, and then we go out and do something that causes exactly the opposite of what we said we wanted. And the example she gave is that She signed a contract with a book publisher, and the purpose of the contract was that she was to write a book about peace. And she had deadlines, as you do when you're publishing. She had deadlines, and you had to turn in drafts and outlines and whatever the steps of the process are. And she kept delaying and kept delaying and kept delaying these things, And finally, it was crunch time. Finally, like doing your homework at the last minute. Finally, she had to stop everything else that she was doing, and she had to produce something for the publisher, or she was going to default on her contract. So she was setting the clock to get up at 2 a.m. so the house would be quiet and nobody else would be there to make noise and disturb her. And then, of course, she wasn't able to get to sleep early enough during the day, and then she was oversleeping. She wasn't getting up at 2 o'clock, and by the time she got up, everybody else in the house was up again, and the house was, and she was just driving herself crazy. And then the irony of the situation caught her. And here she was supposed to be writing a book about peace, and she, through her own action or through her own inaction, through choices that she made consciously or choices that she made without conscious involvement, she created the most unpeaceful situation for herself. So what I'm suggesting then, what we want to keep in mind, is that no matter what is going on, yes, storms come. Yes, buildings flood. Yes, property is destroyed. Yes, sometimes lives are lost. All of these things happen. But even as they are happening, peace is still at the center of our being. Even when the waves are 83 feet high in the ocean, down the bottom of the ocean is still calm. So for us then, the question becomes, if this peace is here, and that's a starting point, the premise that we're starting with is that peace already exists. We don't have to create it. Now, our ego says, yes, I do. I have to find a way to create it. I have to make everybody else settle down. I have to make storms go away. I have to do all these different things. And the ego gets involved, and the ego turns it into a struggle of manipulation, a struggle of control. Right? So it's like the ego says, once I get everything out there the way I want it, I will be at peace. But the soul says, once I am at peace, everything that is out there will be as it needs to be as it needs to be. So all of these things go on about us in our lives. Sometimes it's a storm, sometimes it's a health challenge, sometimes it's a financial challenge, sometimes it's a relationship issue, sometimes it's work. All of these things are going on, but they are all taking place on the periphery. It's like looking down from the space station at the storm, and all of these things that we are caught up in and identified with are the outer bands of the hurricane. But right at the very center is the peace, is the poise, is the calm that is our true nature. And we say, well, that's, it's nice, but how do we experience that? That's really the challenge. How do we experience that? As I say, the ego's approach to it is to try to force it, to try to force peace, We're going to make peace happen. Let's look at the ways of the world. What is the world's definition of peace? Well, when our weapons are so big and so strong that no one else is afraid to, no one else would dare to attack us, then we have peace. That's the ways of the world. And of course, we're constantly caught up in, but what if somebody else gets another bigger weapon? What if somebody else gets a bigger army? Then we've got to worry about that, and we've got to build, and we've got to build, and we've got to build. So the ego says strength and manipulation and containment and protection and all of those things lead to peace. And I'm not saying they're not necessary in the world that we live in, but they don't lead to peace. They don't lead to peace. They may lead to a gap between hostilities, but that's not peace. Right? Spinoza said peace is not the absence of war. It is something that comes from within. So what we want to do today, what we want to consider today is, how do we experience this peace? How can we make it a reality? And what happens to us and what happens to our environment when we do? And what we've got to keep in mind is, we're not trying to create peace. We're not trying to create peace. It's just like when you sit down to meditate and you focus on your breath. You're not creating your breath. You're not creating the oxygen. You are becoming aware of breath. You're becoming aware of breathing. And it's been taking place all along, since the day you were born, right? Till the day you die. Breathing takes place. But you're usually not aware of it, because you're so engaged in other things that you're not aware of it. Peace is like that. The peace is already with us. The peace is already at the center of our being. And all we are doing is letting go of the struggle. Letting go of our over-identification with the struggle. This over-identification of the ain't it awfuls, this over-identification of what it is that I have to do. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to do anything, but that doesn't define you. What we're talking about is finding that peace and keeping that peace as you go about and engage in the activities of the world. I read something a while ago about a new abbot who came to town to take charge of a monastery, and he was on his way into the monastery, and there was a man on the street who stopped him, and he said to the abbot, he said, "You know, I don't understand what you're doing in there behind those walls. I don't understand. You get all of these monks, and they come in and they go behind these walls and they pray." He says, "You know, it seems to me that being isolated from the world like that, they're not living the real world. They're living in a fake world. They don't have the problems of making a living and doing all the things that we have to do out here. And yet they go in there and they try to find peace." He said to the abbot, "What good is that?" And the abbot said, "Well," he says, "this is where they come to learn peace. So then they can go back out into the world and live in the world from a place of peace." He said, "But if they can't find it in there, they're never going to find it out here. They need a place to practice. They need a place to practice. And you and I need a place to practice." I want you to think about how many hours there are in a day, and during this last news cycle, while everybody still had power and everything, you know, the TVs were going constantly. From one channel to the next channel to the next channel, they were going constantly with the details of the storms. How much time do we spend caught up in our day, in our activity, into our livelihood, into all the things that we do, and we don't take time to practice peace, to experience peace? So, peace already is. It is already the very essence of who and what we are. Like our breath, it is with us at all times. We're not trying to make peace happen, but we want to experience the peace. So here is a very simple technique that I'm going to share with you, but you're going to have to practice it. And if not this, then you're going to have to find some other. But like the monks who have to go into the abbey to practice before they can go back out into the world, we have to take time to practice. So all we're going to do is you're going to get yourself in a very comfortable position, whatever's comfortable for you. You know, you don't have to sit in a in a cross-legged lotus position. Just find what works for you. If it's sitting in a chair, that's fine. If it's laying down on your bed, that's fine. But find something that's comfortable for you. And if there's any area of tightness in your body, you know, do your relaxation techniques. You know, I'm sure you're all aware of those. You know, find the muscle that's tight and scrunch it up even tighter, and then release it. Sometimes people start on the tips of their toes and make their way all the way up to their scalp, including the muscles of the face and the ears, where, you know, move your ears, scrunch them tight. But just get yourself relaxed. That's it. And as you are relaxed, you're just going to become aware of that part of your body that's between your armpits, your chest, your heart chakra, your center of peace, your center of love. And as you breathe in, you feel your chest rising. And as you breathe out, you feel your chest falling. And just think of peace. What does peace feel like? Think of love. What does love feel like? The peace is already there. The love is already there. We are simply experiencing it. Now, when you do this on your own, when you do this in your practice, do it for as long as you want, as long as you feel comfortable for. You know, if you can do it for 20 minutes, do it for 20 minutes. If you can only do it for 2, do it for 2. But every time you do it, try to do it a little bit longer, a little bit longer. Now, the whole purpose of this is for us to come to a realization by experience of the peace that is already there, of the love that is already there. And this is a peace, and this is a love that is not dependent on anything on the periphery, any external condition. It's not even dependent upon another person, our beloved. Because, you know, in the ways of the world, we think, well, when I find that wonderful person who loves me, oh my goodness, life is going to be so wonderful. And then we find them, and as Buddhism teaches us, as soon as we have them, we say, oh my God, what happens if I lose this person? What happens if they leave me? Then I will be so miserable. You know? So our peace and our love is not something dependent upon the external. It is something that is already there. We come from love. We return to love. We are love in action. The whole purpose of this exercise is just simply to get ourselves to reconnect, to get ourselves back in touch with the peace and with the love that is already there. And then what we want to do is we want to take that's our abbey, okay? That's our place of practice. And we want to come out of that environment, but we want to keep that feeling of peace with us. And then we want to be able to go back into the world, into the storm, so to speak, into the circumstances, into everything whirling on the periphery. And it'll still be there, and it'll still be whirling. There'll still be lots of stuff going on. But we can be peaceful in the midst of it. We can be observing what is happening. We can be doing the things that we ought to do. You know, if we need to board up windows, we board up windows. If we need to pick up debris, we pick up debris. But instead of identifying with the storm, with the periphery, with the activity as defining us, we are the peace. We are the love that is there in that situation. Now think about any stressful situation. They already have enough worriers. There's no shortage of people that come and worry and stress out and what if. But there is a shortage of people who can come and be love in the situation. Still doing what needs to be done. And I want to be very clear on that. I'm not talking about sitting in the monastery staring at a wall and not being engaged in life. Our life is our practice. But our practice is being in peace, being in love as we engage in these things. So this very simple technique then of rediscovering the peace and rediscovering the love that is there, and then taking that back out into the world, into the storm, into the activity that we must engage in as we live. This changes everything for us. This changes everything, right? So even when the outer bands of the storm are battering one part of the state, the center of the storm is still calm. And the outer bands of the storm are part of the storm, but the center of the storm is still calm. And it's almost, a paradox. You say, here is perfect calm expressing itself as furious activity. We can be perfectly calm. We can be perfectly at peace. We can be perfectly at love. And yet we can still be very busy and very productive and do the things that ought to be done in our lives. But first we have to find that peace. We can't force that peace to happen. We can't try to make all the circumstances out there go away. We have to find the peace that is already here. And sometimes we get overly caught up in worrying, but what happens if the flood comes? Well, if the flood comes, the flood comes. Well, what happens if the house fills with water? Well, if the house fills with water, it fills with water. They filled with water before, they'll fill with water again. What happens if we lose our stuff? Well, we'll get more stuff, Several times in my childhood, we threw out everything that was on the first floor of the house because the storms came. You get more stuff. That's what we do. What happens if we die? If we die, we die. We're all going to die someday anyway, That's why I say we have to become comfortable with this idea that we're not going to be here forever. This is what the Wednesday night group has been studying. You're not going to die. You are life immortal. But you will leave here someday. And that's okay. That's part of the way things work. So if we can find that peace, within us, we can be calm in all of these things that we previously had stressed out about. I'm going to give you one more technique. I want you to consider this one more technique, because this is what we try to do with our ego. Is we think if we isolate ourselves, if we build a wall or a moat, if we build a bulkhead around us, and we protect ourselves, if we keep out all of those stressors, that are in the world out there, then somehow we think that we're going to be safe. We're going to be safe. Who might be the safest people in the world? And they might be prisoners in solitary confinement, in prison. Nobody can get to them to hurt them. They're completely isolated. They're completely separated from everybody else. They get fed a couple times a day. But they're not alive, you see. They're not living life. And what we tend to do is we tend to try to isolate ourselves from all of the externals. That's one way that we try to manipulate the external events so that we can feel peaceful. If I isolate myself from all of that, if I never turn the TV set on, if I never read the newspaper, If I never go outside the house, then I will be okay. I will be perfectly at peace. And it may create the illusion of peace. But if we haven't discovered the peace at the very center of our being, we're still not peaceful. We're still worried. Well, what happens if the wall breaks? What happens if the lock on the door breaks and people can get into me? What happens if somebody stops feeding me? Right? If we think that our peace depends upon external conditions, we're never going to be at peace, because those external conditions are always subject to change. So what we want to do once we learn how to experience the peace that is at the center of our being, then what we want to do is we want to expand our awareness, expand our consciousness. Stop thinking of yourself as just ending where the skin is, because that's not true. We are connected. Like the waves are all connected through the ocean, we are all connected, each and every one of us. We can reach beyond our comfort zone. We can expand beyond our comfort zone. We can make ourselves aware of the storm, so to speak. We can be present, but we can be peaceful. In other words, we're not trying to run and hide from anything. Our peace does not require us to hide. But as the storm experiences the center and the outer bands at the same time, we can be perfectly centered, and we can experiencing all of life at the same time. There's a teaching story that comes from the Sufis. It seems to kind of put things in perspective. And this man got up in the middle of the night. He heard a noise somewhere, and he got up in the middle of the night and he started walking through the woods to see what this noise was all about. And it was pitch dark, couldn't see his hand in front of his face. It was pitch dark, and he tripped and he fell, and he was going down. He didn't know what he was going down. He just knew he was falling. He couldn't see the bottom. He didn't know what was going on. And he hit a branch sticking out of the side of this what he thought was a cliff. And he grabbed that branch, and he held on to that branch for dear life, because if he let go, he would fall. And he prayed, and he cried for help, and he shouted out, and the hours went by, and he got colder and colder, and his hand got number and number, and his fingers started to slip. And finally he could hold no more. He could hold on no more. And he let go. And he dropped about 6 inches, and he hit the bottom of the ditch. And he began to dance. All of that struggling, all of that strife, all of that crying out for help, all of those things, he was caught up in the appearances. But once he let go, he was able to fall to safety. And what we want to consider is that what we want to do is we want to fall into the center of our being. We want to fall into the peace that is already there. Whenever we feel ourselves struggling with the circumstances, whenever we feel ourselves caught up in the events, in the ain't it awfuls, we want to stop. Stop. And if you've done your practice, you know what that feeling is like. You want to bring yourselves back to the center and reveal the peace that is already there. We don't have to create the peace. We have to disengage from our identification with the circumstances. We are not our circumstances. We are the very expression of God's love present in those circumstances, experiencing those circumstances, but not being defined by them. And we are bringing love where it is perhaps the most needed. So as you go forward today, I invite you, if you have time, find time, take a few minutes, think of the practice that we talked about, get comfortable, close your eyes, just become aware of the area of your body between your armpits, your heart chakra. Feel the peace that is already there welling up. Feel the love that is already there welling up. And extend that to everyone whose heart is crying out for peace. You are God's instrument of peace. You are God's instrument of love. You need to make your contact with that. And then everything that you do comes from that place of love. And so it is.